Welcome to Digital Currents, brought to you by Morgan Creek Digital. I'm Xavier Segura. Each episode, we spotlight the topics and people changing the tech industry with a focus on AI, blockchain, chips, and big data. Thanks for listening, and please make sure to subscribe if you like what you hear. And remember, stay current.
Mark, happy Friday. It looks like we've done it again with our matching.
It really is truly amazing. I mean, teal for the end of summer and again, we don't coordinate this, so it is really interesting. I'm sure you don't have the orange pants, so I do have the Bitcoin Friday.
Got those.
And I have the internet wizard, the Bitcoin wizard, join us magic internet money sock game today. Because, the join us phrase, right, which is, from coming up on 10 years ago now, really still applies. It's so early in the sense there's still so many people that are, no, this isn't real. It's a scam. And, so join us is the message that this is a good movement. And you don't have to necessarily wear the teal or the mint, but...
Yeah, that's just to show that that's not part of the normal repertoire necessarily, guys, that are the loyal viewers, the hundreds and thousands of you, blue, that's kind of like table stakes for many of the summer polos, but teal, you really have to go in the catalog. So that is very serendipitous in that way. And Mark, to your point about the join us, I feel like every week now in this summer, we are talking about all-time highs where we did it again. But Mark, I want to pose the question to you to riff on a little bit. Has this been the summer of Bitcoin, or has this been the summer of Ethereum? Because now that Ethereum has come back to a high, we haven't seen in 4 years. Granted, Bitcoin is at the highest we've ever seen, so it's kind of a different league. But there's a little bit more to the ETH story with the Genius Act and all the other pushes. What say you?
No, I think it's a great point. As fantastic as Bitcoin, and look, Bitcoin is larger than all the other coins put together, which is an amazing stat, right? We have 4 trillion with a T. Remember, that's $1 a second for 31,710 years. That's one. So $4 every second for 31,000 years is 4 trillion. In fact, I heard a great quote the other day that if you made $500,000 a day, every day since the pyramids were erected, you would have earned half of what the U.S. government borrowed since June. I mean, my God. No, it's crazy. That's crazy. So the numbers are getting crazy. And that's why Bitcoin is what it is, right? It is your defense mechanism against fiat devaluation. So topic for now. But to your point, this really is the summer of ETH in that, ETH was kind of, I won't say given up for dead, but it was on the ropes to the corner, right? It was put in the corner with the little dunce cap on for all the other old people. And people were like, well, and I even asked the question, right? If it were created today, would anyone use it? Because Solana and Avalanche and all these other tokens are faster and cheaper and SUI. And so why would you use something that's slower and more expensive? Well, the argument is it was first, so it had the biggest installed base, most developer activity. And so with the Genius Act, and again, we did a great episode a couple weeks ago on the Genius Act. If you haven't heard it, go take a listen. But what that does, it cements stable coins in not just the lexicon, but in the working activities of financial services, and they will become one of the payment rails of the future. Now, look, digital fiat, which is basically what a stable coin is, right? It's a digital version backed by fiat, as opposed to backed by something else good. Okay, that's an improvement than electronic or credit card. It's cheaper and faster. But long story short, most of those historically up to this point, USDC, Tether, et cetera, built around, I'm not sure about Tether, but USDC built on Ethereum. I think Tether is. I don't, I should know that, but I don't. And long story short, once the Genius Act was passed and once they identified as Circle and PayPal, always Peter Thiel gets in there, Circle and PayPal as the preferred issuers and everything they do. Remember, Peter Thiel backed Vitalik as a Thiel Fellow, inventing Ethereum. And now Thiel has one of the largest Ethereum treasury companies. And it's a debate as to who is the sailor of Ethereum. Some now want to claim Tom Lee, because Tom Lee runs Fundstrat. Tom's a good guy. I've known him for a long time. And he started as a stock guy, growth stock guy, and he was the guy who would always come on along with Ed Yardeni on CNBC. And whenever else was bearish, he'd be bullish, and that worked out for him. And so then he became a Bitcoiner, and he was always bullish on Bitcoin. We agree with that, right? So, but recently in June, and I don't know the whole backstory. I should call him up and ask him, but I don't know the backstory. But Bitmine Immersion Company. So it was a Bitcoin mining company, and he convinced them to kind of stop what they were doing and convert into an ETH treasury company. And, long story short, they SPAC'd it, or maybe it was already a SPAC and they de-SPAC'd it, but they took this thing and said, we're going to start buying ETH. And he went on CNBC, Tom went on CNBC, and instead of saying Bitcoin's going to the moon, he said, Ethereum, it's going to 500,000. And people were like, excuse me? Long story, BMNR went from $4 to $71 in a matter of days. I think it was like 5 trading days or something crazy. They bought $1 billion worth of Ethereum, became one of the largest owners, even past SharpLink Gaming, which is Joe Lubin's. Then some of the SPAC arbitrageurs came in and dumped the stock, and it crashed like all the other ones do. And we've talked about that before too. There are short-term holders, arbitrageurs, and there are long-term holders, and you got to get rid of the short-term holders. So that's going to create these volatility, sessions. But it has rebounded nicely. I think they bought a bunch more, and now it's a race between SharpLink and BMNR to see who's going to be the biggest Ethereum treasury company. I think there are 9 Ethereum treasury companies. Now, look, I struggle still a little bit with this, in that one of the challenges of Ethereum is, yes, it is the global computer, so to speak, the ledger for things that, NFTs, stable coins, it is a world computer. So I get it. Different than digital money, but it is a better use of blockchain technology. The challenge I have a little bit, don't make the ETH heads mad, but it's, I guess, never been audited, and there are some holes in the history, and there was a rollback, and there's some, and it's proof of stake, which is kind of like saying whoever has the biggest bag gets to make the rules. That kind of sounds like the current financial system and JP Morgan, et cetera. So there are challenges, but supply and demand. If a lot of people start buying something and there's not a lot of people selling and they can't make more, which you can make more ETH, that's the other problem. But there's a burning process that keeps the supply roughly balanced. But long story short, ETH went from $1,500, 1.5, to $4,500 in, I don't know, 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. It was a meteoric rise, and Mark, you were partially right about Tether's formation. I had to look it up. So yes, it exists in ETH as it exists across a couple different chains. I think it was originated originally on Bitcoin OmniLayer, which is sort of that meta protocol that isn't kind of widely used in the current state of things. But, I think if we're kind of zooming out as we like to do, the idea of financial inclusion, it's an interesting executive order that we probably didn't cover last week. The idea of expansion of alternative assets, and I love your quote, Mark, alternative to what? I'll say that it's been added now, or a proposal to add this through an executive order into 401ks, which would include other alternative funds like private equity, real estate, and our favorite crypto. And the numbers here are amazing that if American workers allocate just 1% of their 401k, that's 125 trillion of new capital entering the space. And we have been calling for the 1% movement since 2018. So, obviously, I think that this could, more than anything, Mark, signal what I think is very necessary. We love the summer reading on digital currents. One of the books that I read last summer, which was great, was by Tony Robbins, and the idea of expansion into financial access of great categories like private equity and venture capital. No surprise to us, but he was, talking to Dalio and Dalio's principles read some years ago. But this was the idea, right? You find 8 to 10 uncorrelated assets that, you can kind of look to diversify away some of that risk, but then also you have, higher potential of growth relative to just, T-bills, right? So the idea that you have this long-term asset 401k, you've got now some of these other types of holdings with different maturities. However, they tilt longer term, which could, I think dovetail quite nicely. But I think this continues, Mark, to be a crypto story, a Bitcoin story. And then also, the dark side is it continues to be an institutional crypto story, which may tilt decentralization away towards more centralized financial parties. I think maybe you can't have the yin without the yang in this case, Mark. What say you?
So just want to go back to that. I think the report conflated the number. There's 12.5 trillion dollars in retirement assets in the U.S. And so 1% of that would be 1.25 trillion. But not all of that is actually eligible. Well, maybe it was defined benefit. So some of that's defined benefit, which is dying. And about 9 trillion of that is defined contribution, which is the 401k stuff. Mm-hmm. So that, we'll call it 100 billion at 1%, but 100 billion on a $4 trillion base is a big number. And that's a 1% move. And if you went to 2 or 3 or 4%. So I'm not sure, maybe global. I'm not sure. I don't know what the 125. I think maybe they just had the decimal point.
I think it was like of new capital entering, into the space. But yeah, that was from our friends at Bitwise, Ryan Rasmussen. Shout out to Bit.
Yeah, I think they've got the decimal.
Decimals, yeah. We'll fact check.
Because a trillion here, a trillion there. Pretty soon you're talking real money. In fact, the Donald the other day said trillions of dollars are coming in from tariffs. I'm like, Donald, come on, this is actually a verifiable number. So yes, 30 billion came in July. That's a lot, and it's a lot more than people thought, but it's not trillions.
Right.
And so trillions, billions, it's all just they're big numbers. But the real problem is, as much as and there was another report that said it was 300 billion that came in July in tariffs. I'm not sure that's right, but even if that were true, the problem with that is we spent 600 billion in the month, and that's the part that boggles the mind, that we are at a spending rate that would incur it's the third largest budget deficit in the history of our republic, which is, coming up on 250 years. And that's a scary thought because 2020 was number one, right? We get that. It was, quote unquote, the end of the world, or at least that's what they told us. And the global financial crisis, that was actually really bad. That one we needed to stimulate. But right now, it's kind of like, Donald and Scott Bessent and everybody's, banging on Jerome Powell. Although I do have to admire a guy, right? Here's a guy who sits in his job and everyone's like, I'm going to fire you. Well, you can't. Okay. So I'm not afraid of you. So you can't. And he's like, well, you should resign. In fact, they even leaked. I mean, Bill Pulte, and I know Bill, and he's a good guy, but he leaked a report that he had a letter of resignation from Powell, or he saw like, no, there's Powell's still there. So whatever. But Powell's just like, come at me, and maybe in May, not maybe, but in May of next year, he will be gone. But despite the fact that GDP recovered from a loss in Q1 to positive 3 in Q2, inflation's running hot. PPI came in yesterday 3 times expectations, and they're demanding a 3% rate cut. Like, really? I mean, financial conditions are the second most loose they've been in the last 2 decades already. And so if that were to happen, I mean, fine, buckle up for one, massive inflation, because at the end of the day, that is what they, meaning the rich people, want, right? Because the way you win in this world is you borrow money, okay, in fiat at a flat rate, flat exchange rate. Then you inflate, you devalue the currency, and you inflate the assets that back the loans. Right? Pretty simple, right? If I owe you $100,000 and I buy a house with it, and then my devalued currency makes my house appear to be worth 500,000, I can sell it and pay back the 100K. Woo! And that's the only way with a 37 trillion, that one's real, 37 trillion number of debt for the US, which we can never pay back, but we can make it relatively smaller.
Right.
And this is the same thing they did in the Great Depression, right? The Great Depression, we were talking billions, tens of billions, and the government had all this debt. And they're like, well, how do we get out of that? Oh, I know. We'll just devalue the currency like overnight, 30%, and that'll help. And then we'll go on this systematic destruction of the dollar, and prices will just keep going up. And the rich people, they'll be good. Now, the people who aren't rich, it's less good, right? Because there's a difference if something that you own is going up in price, you're getting wealthier. If something you need to buy to subsist is going up, that's inflation, and that hurts. And so the haves just keep getting, and the have-nots are really, I mean, I saw a picture, and look, there are other factors to this, but, I had a picture of Costco meat a year ago and Costco meat today. Same weight, not the same meat, obviously, but same weight. And it was $50 to $75. And yes, that means, inflation's really high. Well, beef prices have spiked partly because, and again, I'm not blaming Biden per se, but during the Biden administration, something happened where whoever they are, the whatever the agriculture department, said there was a problem. There was some disease. I think they even tried to say it was COVID related in cows. I'm like, no, that's a human disease, but whatever. So they culled
COVID.
And yes, if you destroy a bunch of cows, you can't just print those, right? It takes a while for a calf to grow into a cow and gain 400 pounds. That is maybe one of the most amazing. I mean, I'm prone to hyperbole, but think about the fact that cows eat grass and feed, and they convert that through their, morass of stomachs into beef. I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing. It's kind of like when you see a dinosaur that ate plants and they're, however many gazillion pounds. I don't know, kind of wild, interesting to me.
Well, Mark, interesting story as well, because, shifting gears into the AI side, there's a battle that's heating up right now, which you probably have seen with Perplexity. So there is a kind of thread we've spoken about over the years on the idea of ChatGPT, agentic AI systems like that, which could ultimately replace the search engines, which search engines kind of just sit as a indexing tool for websites or browsers.
Yep.
So now Perplexity is trying to jump to the front of the line and buy one of the biggest in Chrome. So on the one hand, Perplexity is trying to raise at a $20 billion valuation, but they're also trying to buy Chrome for an alleged $34.5 billion bid. So I think this is a pretty interesting one. I mean, listen, I'm as much of a fan about debt financing as the next guy, but I think that this is a very shrewd move. I'm not sure if this is going to go through, but the idea is that they're really capitalizing, Mark, off of the wave of antitrust allegations that are going to Google. Sure. Google always seems to redraw the goalposts. And if anybody has read kind of Eric Schmidt's tale of the founding of Google, you can kind of see this has been the case from the beginning. He said, no, we're not a monopoly in advertising, because digital advertising is just a very small point of the broader scale of advertising. So, we couldn't possibly be that. But what, they neglected to mention was that Google is like 70% or so of all digital advertising. And that pie is growing rapidly as television starts shrinking. And then also Google has a television service down the road.
Hey,
so what's they need?
I mean, they were the 21st search engine. Not the best search engine. They were the 21st search engine. Now, what they did with indexation was really good. And so I don't want to take anything away from Larry and Sergey and the genius, absolute genius. But I think they had some help. It's like the new Post Malone song, which, by the way, I'm kind of a fan. I know there are people who say, oh, you can't sing a country song just by singing it, talking in a country accent. He's still a pop guy. Like, yeah. Have you seen him? He kind of looks like a country guy. I mean,
Post Malone is a complicated fellow. I used to not like his music, but then I kind of dove in a little bit deeper. He's also a really big guitar guy, where he's not the best player, but he just loves the whole atmosphere. Check out his video on Norm's rare guitars. So I agree with you, Mark. We live in a world where people can be many different things. So kind of the idea that, Perplexity is now trying to move into this kind of AI battleground with the browser kind of being that central point that we all use to access the internet, agentic AI, the way that we kind of browse information, and then that's all fed in through websites. So if they win.
And it's so interesting, right? Because clearly the browser has been the number one kind of gateway.
Right.
So from its very beginning, right, with Netscape, and then Jim Barksdale came over and he and Andreessen created this great business. And then Microsoft said, well, we like that better. So we're not going to include Netscape in our software. We're going to give you Explorer. And the genius of that, right, was, well, if you needed DOS, this is another thing, right? And it used to be called QDOS, Quick and Dirty Operating System, because Microsoft didn't have an operating system when IBM came looking for one. But they had this thing called QDOS, and they became the de facto standard. Someone deemed them. And the fact that, Bill's aunt is on the WEF board, maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. But what's interesting about all of that is if you can distribute to everybody and you can block, right? So if you own the entry point, and so Chrome is an entry, like, for example, I use Brave browser because I like it because it blocks pop-ups, but it's not allowed like on Google Meets and Teams, they won't let me. So I have to go to Chrome. And so there's part of me that says, hey, Perplexity, just create your own gateway, right? Like ChatGPT has, I mean, Chat or Grok. But I do get that everybody, and I do mean everybody, either by choice or just by default, right? Because every time I open my Apple, Chrome pops up and says, hey, don't you want us to be your default browser? I'm like, no, I don't. Just go away. But I think at some point it becomes such a hassle that you just say, fine. And so there's a lot of, and now it seems like an awful lot of money to pay for the gateway if you're not going to use any of their services. If what you're doing as an AI model, an LLM, is very different than indexation, although now the LLMs are starting to search behind the scenes, right? It's not just filling in the next word based on the probability. They're actually going out and searching and giving you stuff. I'm like, okay, so that's fraught with peril because now you could be serving me up the promoted stuff that I don't want, which is why I shifted away from search engines. So at the end, they're probably all going to take the money from advertisers who are trying to get to us through our data.
And Google is almost certainly, Mark, going to be expected to appeal whatever the ruling may be in the coming days on their ongoing antitrust suit, where they're allegedly going to be, forced to divest away from Chrome. So, this is, I don't think, going to happen anytime soon. But it was an unsolicited bid, more of a power move, and kind of, as that reminds you, Mark, of power moves. Let's talk about a fallen out bromance between Sam Altman and Elon, and the feud continues on the days of our lives. So they started off as colleagues, an investor relationship, all was well. Yep. And they had kind of rival products when things hit the skids, and then now in a reversion. First, it was Altman that had the company, then Elon came out with Grok to say I can do it better and do it in the right way. Well, then now Altman has fired back, and this time they're going deep into the recesses of our mind with a new company called a new company with a brain-computer interface called Merge Labs. So Elon, as you know, has Neuralink, which is the idea to try to make our, in touch with our inner total recall. For those who have seen the original 80s movies with Arnold, very slept-on movie. And the original Go to Mars, so I'm sure Elon was...
Love that movie. Love that movie.
Great movie. So Altman now is aiming to co-found this next company and trying to raise at an 850 million valuation. And so the idea, he will kind of merge this with ChatGPT down the road. Again, going in touch with his inner Elon, trying to have two companies at once. But I think, Mark, that this is so fitting, when you have kind of two big rivals like this, trying to kind of go at each other, take each other out of business, not necessarily collaborating. I'm not sure who wins here. I think generally the incumbents, but I mean,
I agree. Yeah. But look, the Me Too does work, and because there are multiple browsers, right? It's not just Chrome. I mean, there is still Explorer, Internet Explorer, and there's Brave, and there's DuckDuckGo, and there's a bunch of other browsers. Now, most of them are small relative to the king, but there's a there is a coattails play here. Look, and if you haven't seen the movie Total Recall, you should watch it, and because they say Hollywood is not fiction. It's kind of pre-announcements. And so, you watch something like, Eyes Wide Shut, and it's like, well, wait a second, that's all going on in real time. Or there's all kinds of examples of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this is one where, again, it's not going to go anywhere tomorrow. The idea that our brains can literally become computers and start, having telekinesis across our devices. But it's this idea that, billionaires trying to drive each other out of business, because that's kind of what we've been taught. And
I don't want, mostly because I've seen Total Recall, and
yep.
I don't want an accessible chip in my body, right? I don't want the ability for someone else to change the code. I mean, look, I do have an electric car and I have a little Kia, and my wife's like, absolutely not. Didn't you see the Fast and Furious movie where Charlize Theron was making the cars like, and like,
Oh, that's great.
yeah, I mean, look, that absolutely, if your car is connected to a network, right, and they can download software onto your car, they could also take control. Now, who's they? Whoever is in charge of that software. So if someone puts a chip in your head, they can, because you can't stop them and so I like, look, if I had, some dread disease, I couldn't see, would I, take a new chip to try to get a new ocular nerve? Yeah, I probably would. If I had ALS, would I try anything to stop? Absolutely. But regular life, not happening.
Hard pass. And probably the last story for today. We'll have to do the Charlie for next week. But the idea that we're getting ready to go back to school in a couple of weeks. Again, folks, just listen to our show. You will find nuggets of what is to come in society in different ways. Mark, you spoke a couple of weeks ago about how the best teachers in the world can start to create a digital version of themselves, augmented through AI, and that can streamline learning so that way we can, get past the basics a little bit more, things like intro to chemistry, intro to accounting. Well, there's a new Stanford study I'm sure you've seen and looked at, Mark, that revealed that it's growing faster than ever before in K through 12. The idea that now in this group of 9,000 teachers, last year, 40% are or more are regular power users, and this was last year. Now this year, I'm sure it's more. It has increased, certainly much more than that. But some of the ideas here, and both of my parents were teachers, so I'm sure they could have benefited from this idea of more of this streamlining for weekday morning routines. They're embedded in sort of active preparation rather than after hours in their follow-up with students. So it's this idea that we can use AI not to replace human beings, but all of the burdens. One of the hard things with being a teacher is you're really only compensated for the time that you're in the classroom. But like many jobs, you have to do so much to prepare for that, and that really goes unrecognized. So if you have a tool that can kind of get you into a place where you're creating more value, one-to-one with the students, you can kind of streamline a lot of this prep work, which is still work, but can really be, streamlined. So the research says that some of these metrics alone don't capture the full educational, impact, where there's still some challenges in this adoption with ethics, et cetera. But the idea is that, this could still fit relatively seamless for some applications. And I don't think it's slowing down with school starting in a couple of weeks. More and more are going to use AI, wouldn't you
Well,
say?
look, I mean, tools make us better. So the idea that AI is going to replace all the teachers. No. In fact, just the opposite. The AI, you can have an AI tutor, right, that helps reinforce learning for an individual student. And in theory, that meant every student could have a single teacher. Yeah, but a teacher, right, a facilitator of a group of say 30 kids in a classroom can use this tool that's customized to each student, okay? Because as great as most teachers are, the idea that they could know the absolute personal needs of every single one of their student all the time, it's a big ask. And the idea that any individual has all the knowledge, it's not real. And every tool that we've invented, whether it was books, right? Teachers in the early days, right? They were Socratic and they spoke. It was all lecture and conversation and dialogue and discourse. Well, then books came along and we'll say, okay, now go read this and then we'll discuss it. Okay. And then you could actually record history. Oh, I'm going to learn about something that I wasn't there for because I read about, Alexander the Great's conquest. So now I can teach you about it. So books actually are pretty good. And then how about a chalkboard where you could write this so people could see it? Because if you see it and you write it and you touch it and you hear it, you get more memory. Well, what about a computer? But that's cool because now I can access encyclopediabritannica.com. As you said, the most valuable thing in Web 1. Each tool has made the teachers better. And so I think fearing AI and saying, oh, can't have ChatGPT in school. No, we should absolutely, and we should teach people how to use it. And we should teach people what it's really good for and what it's not really good for and how to be discerning in the feedback that you get from it. And every one of us can be made better with these intelligent tools. But what they can't do, and we've had this conversation, I don't think they're going to be able to do, they can't do what the brain does.
Right.
Like no one could have predicted the things that we were going to talk about today, but the brain does that. So Mark, you're just ADD. That's your problem. I mean, well, okay, fine. But the brain picks up on subtle cues and subtle things. And a tool that lets you say, like if I say, I'm curious about Perplexity using Chrome. Okay. I'm going to go do some research on that. And let's think about how a browser, is that a good idea, or should we be rethinking the gateway to the new internet, Web 3? Maybe that's not a browser. Maybe that's maybe it's Neuralink. Not for me, but
hard pass.
It's a long winding thing to say teachers who embrace the tools will become better teachers. Mm-hmm. And the students who utilize the tools for the things that they're for. Like if I have a pry bar, okay, and I need to separate two things that are nailed together, okay, if I'm doing that for, construction project, that's a good use of the pry bar. If I take that pry bar and I go break a window and go loot, okay, that's a bad use. Tools can be used for bad things, but if you use it for what it's designed for, you get better. Like to try to pry two pieces, I don't know if you work construction or not, but trying to pry two pieces of wood together apart, I mean, it's really hard. Pry bar makes it super easy.
Mark, my favorite time of the year has got to be up there when we do the Habitat for Humanities and we get to work construction.
Yeah, you're a construction guy.
For a day. Anytime we can get an excuse to have a power tool and help the less fortunate, I mean, it's a win-win on that end. But we'll have to kind of wrap it short on that note today, Mark. I think there's a couple things that we'll cover next week, which I should have mentioned at the top when we're talking about ETH and the latest acquisitions that we've seen now with Ripple acquiring a stablecoin company for $200 million in their latest move. But I think for now what we're seeing here is it's crypto summer. Whether it's Bitcoin or
and there's a reason the administration kept using the word crypto.
That's a good point.
Instead of Bitcoin, right? Because they were never going to be just Bitcoin. Now, there's been the rumor on again, off again all week of whether the strategic Bitcoin reserve is dead or not dead. I think it's back on life support, but and it was crazy. We talked about this last week that, we hadn't heard from Senator Lummis, and literally I texted you as soon as we hung up the phone, my phone fed me a story about, hey, Senator Lummis saying, no, the president supports my bill. So far, it doesn't look that way, but maybe someday.
Maybe someday, Mark. Maybe next week. So we'll probably wrap it on there and remind our listeners and thank our listeners as always for tuning in every week. Please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And as always, stay current.
Thank you for joining us this week on Digital Currents. Check out our links to our website and social media in the show's description box. Please make sure to subscribe if you like what you hear. And remember, stay current.
This podcast should not be construed as investment advice nor solicitation for the sale of any security, advisory, or other service. Investment themes and ideas discussed may be owned by funds managed by the host and podcast guests. Any conflicts at the time of production have been mentioned by the host but are subject to change. Listeners should consult their personal financial advisors before making any investment decisions.